last agenda item, Dr. Hastings is going to stand in for Dr. Norgard, who is ill, on the Independent Science Board report. Dr. Goodwin, feel free to comment on all of these issues at your discretion.
Thank you. Yes, I got an email this morning from Dr. Norgard saying he is not feeling well and requested that he not have to come and make this presentation. So I volunteered to cover it for him since I attended the meeting, the Independent Science Board meeting. So the Independent Science Board, their last meeting was January 12th and 13th, and we had a flurry of activity the week before because we'd heard that Jane Lubchenco, who is the administrator for NOAA and the Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, was going to be in town, and we were requested to host a discussion with her at noon on the Thursday of the meeting. So we made that happen, and then not surprisingly, as happens with high-level federal administrators, she was called back to Washington the night before, or the morning of, and so we did not have that opportunity, although one of the staff at NOAA filled in for her, Will Stell. But we would welcome those opportunities should they occur in the future. So the Science Board basically covered four things. They had developed a couple of memos that resulted from their two earlier meetings this fall in October and December, in which they had heard from a lot of folks at the state and federal agencies, stakeholders, and legislators, where they asked them questions about how science is used, what science is needed for managing the Delta, and for making new policies and laws. And they developed some memos kind of summarizing their observations. The first memo, and you've got the draft memos in your packet. To cut to the chase, they are finalizing these. They did not approve either of these as written, just to let you know. So final ones will be forthcoming. The first memo that we call the short memo is basically a letter to the legislature, and this was at the invitation of Dennis O'Connor, who is one of the legislative staffers, saying, write us a letter if you feel strongly about this. So they decided to, and we at the science program appreciate it because the nature of the letter is basically requesting stable long-term funding for the Delta Science Program.
Gosh.
So I know.
Who could imagine?
We were somewhat supportive of that letter. So, and the memo, that memo will not be revised significantly, but there were some minor edits, and then they asked us to develop a short list of accomplishments that they could use to append to the back of their memo, kind of backing up their statements. So that will be finalized at the March meeting, as will the long memo, which was the second one, which really is intending to summarize what they heard from all the constituents. And this memo is going to undergo more significant revision.
Can I just raise
Sure.
a point? We've had this discussion before. Putting aside the fact that everybody wants a safe and secure funding source for all of their programs, I think these memos help make the case for Delta Science collectively being a big deal. And Joe's earlier budget memo educated us to the fact that almost 2/3 of our total spending is for science-related activities on the Delta Stewardship Council, which is consistent with that. But a lot of the stuff comes up on confusions of roles and so on, but ultimately it comes down to the fundamental question. It's one thing to say science should really be used, but how do we know when it happens? And there are some examples on adaptive management, I guess, that are out there. But ultimately, I come back to a public policy question. Give me a structure that suggests how science's role can be effective. Not that it's a desired goal. The statute is far more clear than that. But as you know, the ISB has been reluctant to accept my suggestion they have 50% of the votes on everything for the co-equal goals and water supply and the ecosystem. But I don't know how to get to answer the questions even they raise unless the scientists who wish to be their judgment to be determinative get involved at some point in some way. And as you know, the BDCP is exploring all kinds of organizational structures, good, bad, indifferent. I have no idea what they are, and it's a continuing refrain. I'd sure like to get their clear, precise suggestions, and as opposed to, that's not a scientific question, you have to find your own answers.
Well, I can give you my perspective and observations, but I think our Delta Independent Science Board is very interested in that topic. And one of the things they see, one of the purposes of these memos that they're producing and the meetings that they had in the fall and winter was to help the Delta Science Program. One of our tasks that's outlined in the draft Delta Plan is to come up with a Delta Science Plan. And in that Delta Science Plan, we're going to make recommendations about both the provision of science and funding and synthesis of it, but also just organizational recommendations, how to work better among all the agencies and stakeholder groups providing science. And it's possible we could delve into the governance side of it as well.
I would draw your attention to page 5 in the report, which I thought was the most interesting, lines 15 through 22, and they noted that a number discussion arose about the need for a bold experiment in adaptive management. One thing you might want to consider is a letter from about 2 weeks ago from 6 or 7 Bay Area water agencies, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and the state and federal water contractors. I think I have the membership right, where they identified 3 near-term actions, mostly on levees. That's my recollection. But and the expenditure amount was, again, I think this is in the range, $163 million. Well, in a world where billions are our common measure of spending, $163 million seems doable to me. And without judging the 3 specific projects they mentioned, the notion of getting together Bay Area water districts with water exporters and trying to figure out a way to have a bold experiment on science fits into that nomenclature. I hear that the Department of Water Resources is even going to facilitate discussions in attempting to do this with interested parties, including environmentalists. And I'd bet you a lot of money that somebody will decide that the spending should be roughly co-equal, kind of like the statute says. But there's maybe a near-term opportunity for a structural experiment on adaptive management that would help educate us all on whether something like that can work, can move fast, and achieve social goals and do good science at the same time. And it caught my attention on the report. I think it was a very interesting idea. That's an illustration. That small little piece that's been floated may be a funnel through which you could develop something.
Okay, sure. We'll. I haven't read that letter, so we'll look at that. And
yeah, I think it's on our website. I think it is. I can't remember. If not all, I've got copies around. Okay.
Yeah, scientists are fans of these bold experiments, and we often feel limited by the law. The Endangered Species Act on one hand, and then the water contracts on the other hand. But yes, so I think Anka's mentioned this many times. We would actually look forward to a year where we had an abundance of water and then another year where we didn't, so that we could actually look at the response.
We're well on the way to having that experiment for you.
Nature is somewhat giving us that opportunity now.
Yes.
But I was going to point out that Cliff Dahm and several other prominent scientists participated in writing a report to BDCP, the Adaptive Management Advisors Report to BDCP, and in that they tackled this issue of governance and recommended a way to bring that science information to policymakers in a better way. And it was basically to find this special group of people that they called polymaths, where they would find scientists who were had the breadth to actually understand policy really well, but also knew the science really well, sit in the same room as people that were very well aware of policy but could understand the science, and that those folks sit together and hammer out recommendations, science-based policy recommendations to the actual policymakers. Now, they didn't go quite as far as have a scientist on the policy body, but
because that's too bold for a bold
that
experiment?
might be too bold, but I think you should ask Dr. Norgaard that the next time he's here. Right. But yes, I can pass that information on. Okay. So again, they're revising both memos. They'll bring both of them back at the next meeting in March. March 8th and 9th is the next meeting. Other highlights from this meeting: the board is happily pursuing the other reviews that they've been asked to do besides reviews of the Delta Plan. And among those are the review of the draft EIR for BDCP. So we just heard about that, but we thought it wise to give them an update. So Carla Namath from the Resources Agency gave them an update on where BDCP is right now. They also had the opportunity to look at the same memo that you've seen on the previous agenda item, kind of outlining their responsibilities for reviewing the draft EIR. And they discussed how they think they will approach reviewing that draft EIR, and they recognized that they would likely need help, that they as a body would need to rely on others to do a lot of the homework and prep. So certainly they will rely on the science program's review of the draft effects analysis of BDCP. So that was easy. They know they'll rely on that. But they asked Science Board staff to come back to them at the next meeting with the straw proposal on who might do the various homework assignments for them so that they can be prepared to review this 20,000-page document. And of course, they're going to focus just on the science aspects of it. But so we will be doing that at the next meeting. And then they also, the other area that they're interested in reviewing and commenting on is the whole process by which flow standards and objectives are set by the state board. And this really was a result of the meetings that they had this fall, because pretty much all the stakeholder and agency folks recognized the importance of those flow standards in helping them or advising them on how they do their job. And so Les Grober from the state board gave a very nice presentation to the Independent Science Board outlining their approach for developing these standards. And I think Joe just mentioned that the notice of preparation has come out for those. But in the meantime, the Water Board has put out their approach for a component of that, and that is for the San Joaquin River flow standards and for the South Delta salinity standards. And Les went over that proposed approach, and it does have an adaptive management piece in it. He talked about that. And the Independent Science Board was very interested in this approach, and what they want to do is, after the next meeting, again, come up with some sort of a memo on this, because they see that as a pilot. What they're proposing for the South Delta is a pilot for the bigger effort that's forthcoming. So the Independent Science Board wants to weigh in now on how they see science being used to develop those flow objectives, because they did recognize some areas they thought could be improved. They did applaud the fact that the state board does go out for peer review, individual peer reviewers. But they actually thought those peer reviewers missed a few things, so they want to comment on that. So anyway, be expecting a report sometime after the March meeting on that as well.
Okay.
And that's what I have.
Questions of Lauren? Okay. Thank you very much.